If you've ever been obsessed with an iconic watch, only to try it on in person and realized it was too big on you, you're not alone. Many collectors are part of the small wrist club, myself included, and we've all experienced this one way or another. Luckily though, there are plenty of famous watches out there that are made in sizes perfect for smaller wrists. Today, I'm showing you 12 of the most iconic watches of all time, across 4 of the most common categories, with a great bonus watch for the obscure reference near the end of the video. The first category of watches I wanted to cover are dive watches. Probably the most sporty of the popular watch styles, I think dive watches perhaps have some of the most iconic watches of any style. Unfortunately, most of the most famous dive watches are also quite large for the small-wristed among us. Luckily, there are still a few options. Although the modern Omega Seamasters are generally rather large and thick, you can still have the iconic design in a smaller and more reasonable size with the 36mm Seamasters from the previous generations. It's undeniably a famous watch, worn by James Bond and extremely popular for decades. I really appreciate that Omega actually made a smaller version of the Seamaster, because many brands forgo smaller variations of their iconic collections, keeping them out of reach for many of us. This version is a faithful reinterpretation though, keeping the classic Seamaster bracelet design, textured wave dial, and of course the highly contentious helium escape valve. The Tudor Submariner may not have been a watch you expected to see on this list, because in and of itself, it's not exactly an iconic watch. But in the same way that I discussed the Tudor Prince Date Day in my recent review of it, I believe that these older Tudor variations of Rolex models are just as high quality and able to claim the fame of their Rolex counterparts. The Tudor Submariner is no different in this too, as it serves as a more affordable and smaller version of the Rolex Submariner. And if 36mm is still somehow too big for you, you'll be delighted to know that the Tudor Mini Sub exists in 33mm, serving as an even smaller Submariner. To me, it's rather strange that Rolex has never made a modern Submariner in smaller sizes. It seems like it would be a slam dunk to sell a more accessible version of perhaps the most iconic watch ever made. But maybe it's for the best, because you can still get these Tudor subs for less than a Submariner, and with no waitlist I might add. Although I do not consider myself to be too big of a fan of Blancpain, especially considering the widely accepted mismanagement of the brand by the Swatch Group, I feel that it wouldn't be right to exclude them from the discussion of iconic dive watches. After all, Blancpain is the world's oldest watch brand, and they lay claim to the world's first modern dive watch, the 50 Fathoms. Up until recently, this watch was fairly unwearable for the small-wristed among us because of its large dimensions. With the new Automatique line though, you can get this classic design in 38mm. This comes in a number of variants, colors, metals, and strap options, and at a pretty ridiculous price tag, but you're getting a plethora of premium specifications as well. At the very least, you can rest easy that this watch is beautifully finished and has some pretty great wearing dimensions. Chronographs are definitely the most difficult category of watches to find in smaller sizes, which I've always felt is unfortunate, because it's probably my favorite watch complication. The complexity of the movement almost always makes it difficult to fit everything into a small diameter case, and if you can, it's typically pretty thick. That being said, the chronograph complication is quite old, and a significant amount of advancements have been made over time to make smaller chronographs possible. I'll admit, I'm being a bit cheeky with this one, especially after my whole spiel about the difficulty of chronograph movement sizes. And I know this watch is not what comes to mind when you imagine a chronograph. But tell me, can you name me a more iconic, more accessible, and perfectly sized watch with a chronograph function than the F91W? That was a bit of a rhetorical question, because I know the answer is no. This watch is like $15, is perhaps the most purchased watch of all time, and comes in a great sizing that practically anyone can wear. Is it the perfect watch? No. I find mine has issues from time to time, and it has its quirks. I can tell you though, it's always started working again, and the reliability for the price is unmatched. I use a chronograph on this thing constantly for workouts and rest periods, and for that, it's worth way more than what I paid for it. For the first actual mechanical chronograph on this list, I'm going with the Zenith El Primero, but with a stipulation. Being the first automatic chronograph, this watch and movement are undoubtedly iconic, and there have been a ton of variations of the El Primeros over the years. I believe what sets most of them apart aesthetically is their tritone color scheme and sizing, as they have maintained a great 38mm size throughout their collections. It's an amazing watch with a rich history, iconic aesthetic, and a great high beat movement. My stipulation though, is that any sub 40mm El Primero or Chronomasters apply here, except the modern Chronomaster originals. Now that's a pretty big stipulation, considering that many of you are probably the most familiar with the El Primero because of this modern line. The reason I'm excluding these though, is despite the listed measurements of 38mm, these wear horrendously on smaller wrists. If you've never seen these in person, you may not understand, but the lugs on these models are lifted up on the case, giving the watch a strange hovering feeling. You'd think with videos and pictures of front-on shots that this watch fits well, but I promise you that if you try this on in person, you'll change your mind. I personally have the previous generation of the El Primero, and when I tried the modern version in person, my wife and I both immediately agreed that mine wore significantly better and true to size than the newer version. This is such a shame too, because the newer versions are so cool. Now, before you discount this pick for small wrist, let me explain myself first. The Omega Speedmaster Professional is definitely not the first watch to come to mind when you think of smaller case sizes, but I genuinely believe that it can be pulled off by a lot more people than you might initially anticipate. First, I know this watch is listed as being 42mm in diameter, but those who have ever seen a Speedmaster or own one know that it's really more like a 40mm watch because of the right side crown guards adding 2mm to that measurement. Still, 40mm isn't exactly what most would describe as small. But this is when I tell you that the Speedmaster is actually closer to 39mm when you take its actual measurements. But despite the specifications and written dimensions, the Speedmaster Professional really isn't that big. Personally, I was originally considering the Speedmaster 3520.50 triple date before trying on the Speedmaster Professional in person, and I realized that it actually fit me. I'm going to be discussing this phenomenon more in my next video, but if you have wrist on the smaller size and really like the Speedmaster Professional, give it a try in person with an open mind, and you may be surprised just how well it fits you. The twisted lyre lugs, amazing bracelet taper and end links, and uniquely shaped case sides all contribute to a wearing experience smaller than what you'd expect. Now of course, if you still feel the Moonwatch is too big, there are numerous 38mm Speedmasters, Speedy Reduced, and other references such as the triple date I mentioned earlier. The Speedmaster is a major cash cow for Omega, and you better believe that there's a version for everyone as far as colors and sizing goes. If you've made it this far, I'd assume you're enjoying this video. If you like this sort of content and are interested in seeing more videos from me, please consider subscribing. I upload a new video every week about topics just like this, and subscribing lets me know what people are enjoying and want to see more of. Thank you. In contrast to the chronograph, dress watches are definitely the easiest to find iconic designs for smaller wrists. What we would consider a dress watch today were way more prevalent in the past, and it was significantly more common to wear more restrained and what we call classic designs. Because of this, there are a plethora of famous watches for smaller wrists in the dress category. Of course, the first watch that comes to mind is the Rolex Datejust, but I feel this is too obvious, and I've already talked enough about it in recent videos. If I had to name one iconic dress watch, I think one of the first that I'd think of would be the Cartier Tank. This is certainly not an obscure choice, but most iconic watches aren't. I feel that so much has already been said about this watch, everyone knows about it and has seen it at some point. The influence of this design cannot be understated though, as it revolutionized the dress watch design language as a whole, and you see so many variations of this from both Cartier and from other brands essentially making homages. You've got the original Tank, the Française, Anglaise, American, Solo, and Must, and then there's the Santos and associated collections as well, which isn't a tank, but the design language is quite similar these days. In addition to the seemingly endless variations of tanks, most of these come in various sizes, a majority of which are perfect for smaller wrists. After all, the Tank is often advertised as a woman's watch, so you would expect there to be a significant amount of women-sized models. Everything from the rectangular shape, Roman numeral indices, and the cabochon crown are what make this watch one of the most recognizable and famous of all time. For many collectors, the Longa 1 is practically the holy grail of dress watches. Its distinctive dial layout sets it apart from so many other watches already, and that's before any discussion of the aesthetics of this watch. Somehow, Longa manages to maintain a reserved and restrained design, while at the same time accomplishing a level of finishing that is arguably second to none. This certainly can be said about the movement finishing, which is absolutely the best in the entire industry. When it comes to the watch itself though, what really can be said? The asymmetric layout is beautiful, and the big date, of course, is another trademark of the brand and German design. The Longo 1 comes in a ton of different variations and complications, but the 38mm versions with the moon phase are definitely my favorite. Clearly, with their grail status among enthusiasts, these are out of the reach for most people. That doesn't stop the Longo 1 from being incredibly iconic and wearing amazingly on small wrists. I know that if I won the lottery and I could get any watch on this list, it wouldn't even have to be a choice for me to pick this. I know this is a little bit of a cop-out, but for my third pick in the dress watch category, I'm going with more of a grouping of watches, vintage dress watches. I'm not talking about just any vintage dress watch though, but the distinguished examples among the huge variety of options. The first and primary option that came to mind for me were vintage Omega DeVilles and Seamasters, which are fairly affordable and definitely iconic in their own right, with classic vintage sizing that fits great on a smaller wrist. You get a quality movement in history for typically under $1,000 with an elegant, understated design from a well-regarded brand. Vintage Cartier and even Rolex come to mind too, the former having seemingly endless options, including the tank I mentioned earlier. Vintage Longines is another affordable choice, with models such as the classic Conquest and Flagship. Really, what you're looking for here is a classic and reserved design from esteemed brands, typically on a leather strap and in smaller sizing around 33 to 38mm. Oftentimes you'll find a solid or plated gold case, applied indices, and quite a thin case thickness, usually because of their manual wind only status, for significantly less than what you'd pay for a similar watch these days. And finally, we get to the everyday and others watches category, a sort of catch-all for your classic three-handers that can go with pretty much everything. You've all heard the phrase, go anywhere, do anything, and I think the watches I've got in this category are arguably the most famous to fall into this group, regardless of their sizing. If there was a contender for the watch worn by the most influential and famous people on this list, it would likely go to the Vulcain Cricket. If you're not a big enthusiast, you may have never even heard of this watch, but it absolutely has earned its iconic status as a result of its usage by a number of US presidents throughout the years. The Cricket may not be the most expensive or famous watch, but it's undoubtedly super cool. What makes the Cricket so sought after is that it's a mechanical alarm watch with a great history, hence the name. Because of this history, there are a number of variations of it on the market, from vintage to the modern line Vulcain still sells. Within the modern line, you can get the Cricket in 36 or 39mm, which are both likely to fit pretty well. When you go vintage though, you can find even smaller models, usually around 34mm. Similar to most of the watches on this list, you can find these in various colors and dial layouts. For many, the Aquaterra is the first watch to come to mind when you think of an everyday watch. Despite this, the Aquaterra could have been mentioned in the dive watches section. They typically come with a large amount of water resistance and often are worn on rubber straps as well. I mean, these are technically Seamasters after all. Categorization aside, the Aquaterra is an amazingly versatile watch with so many different colors and dial textures as well as sizes. It's a serious contender for a one-watch collection for me. I know I've certainly been lusting over them for years. For the smaller sizes, the current line comes in 38, 34, and 30mm, with sunburst, lacquer, and teak dials, among others. And in previous generations, I believe there are even more sizes, 39, 36, and 28mm, and probably several others. Out of every watch in this video, this is probably the most diverse when it comes to sizing and styles. There's no doubt that you'll be able to find one of these in your ideal size and in the color you want. If the Aquaterra isn't the first everyday watch that comes to mind for you, I'd guess one of Rolex's collections is what does. The Explorer is probably more of the enthusiast option among these, if you can even say that for a Rolex. Sporting the classic 369 dial layout, the Explorer really is a do-it-all watch. The Explorer has reached legendary status through both its association with the first Everest ascents in Alpine history and with the sheer popularity of modern Rolexes. It's gone through a few size changes throughout the years, with references from the 50s and 60s measuring at 34 and 36mm, and the more modern references having 36 and 39mm versions. It's an iconic, albeit somewhat plain design, but sometimes the boring designs are the strongest. In many ways, the Explorer reminds me of the Speedmaster, a watch born of the 50s with a basic printed white on black dial layout that was made famous from dangerous expeditions with a design that has stood the test of time. And if the Explorer isn't to your taste, I discussed the 34mm Air King a few videos ago, which serves as a great alternative at a better price with significantly more color and dial variations. The obscure reference for today is a unique model within a line that is fairly well known among chronograph enthusiasts. Universal Genève is a brand among many that fell to the quartz crisis back in the 70s, only to be revived recently by Breitling. Back in the day though, they made a ton of iconic and classic pieces worth looking at even today. The Universal Genève Tricompax is a classic chronograph sought after by many collectors because of its timeless aesthetic and amazing dimensions for the complexity. The Tricompax is definitely an if you know watch in the vintage world. Typically, these come in a more basic gold case and white dial, but the variation I'm highlighting here, dubbed the Evil Clapton, is a surprisingly contemporary looking design for a watch made over 60 years ago. Of course, the standout detail on this watch that links it to this video is that it comes in at 36mm in diameter, which is practically unheard of in today's world of mechanical chronographs. And such a shame too, because most chronographs today are so large that people with small wrists often can't even wear them. And when you consider that this isn't just a chronograph, but a triple date and a moon phase as well, with a tachometer bezel too, you start to wonder how Universal Genève were even able to fit all this inside that case. That's the wonder of vintage watches though. You can get pieces that seem impossible by today's standards with elegant, timeless designs and features that just aren't available today. And when I say this watch looks contemporary, I wasn't kidding. Look at the bezel and lugs on this piece and tell me that it doesn't remind you of a certain other classic chronograph. The reverse panda layout is a fan favorite color scheme too, with the red colored accents and moon phase at 12 o'clock. Maybe it's just because I'm a sucker for a classic chronograph design and the neo-vintage aesthetic, but I'm sort of obsessed with this one. In classic fashion, this is absolutely out of my current reach on the price, and I suppose that's the curse of having these sort of tastes. Even so, the more common variations of the Tricompax are a bit more achievable and still every bit as lovable, in my opinion. It's got a bit of everything. A classic dressy style, complications in chronograph, and an amazing sizing that will fit just about anyone's wrist. I feel that every watch enthusiast goes through phases in their collecting journey. First, they get into the hobby and lust over the popular classics such as the Submariner or Speedmaster. Over time, as they learn more, they become more and more disinterested in the popular models and start to seek out the more unique options. But then, at some point, you learn to appreciate the timeless designs of the iconic watches in the industry. You start to understand why these watches got so popular, and you gain an appreciation for them one way or another. I find myself swinging back and forth every few years in this regard, an ebb and flow of interest in the big names. As someone with a smaller wrist, and I know many of you are too, I enjoy the fact that I can own some of these classic designs at a smaller size, while still maintaining their history and aesthetic. I hope at the very least that I was able to introduce you to a watch or two that you haven't heard of before today, or gave you a little bit of hope that maybe you were able to pull off an iconic design you hadn't thought of before. What's your opinion on these iconic watches? Where are you along your watch journey in regards to the classics? I'm excited to hear from you in the comments. Let me know about any brands, watches, or topics you'd like for me to cover in future videos. Thank you for taking the time to watch.